Good morning, bonjour, ni hao, xin chao, what's up? It's me, Mr. Jordan. Welcome back. Today we're looking at The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. We're going to be doing a brief summary and recap of chapter 16. Then we're also going to do a deeper line-by-line reading and analysis of chapter 16. And at the end, we'll finish up with some vocabulary, as well as the context and definitions for those new words. Let's begin with a brief recap and summary. In chapter 16, the ceremony that we've heard so much about finally takes place. This ceremony is taken directly from biblical scripture, from Old Testament. So it refers back to the epigraph at the beginning of the book. Now, Offred is fully clothed, except for her undergarments, lying on her back, and literally she's having intercourse with the commander. He's also fully clothed. And then there's a third person involved, Serena Joy, who is behind Offred with her knees on either side, and we're told she's squeezing her arms or her shoulders. She's actually hurting Offred. She's squeezing her so hard. This ceremony is the fertility ceremony. In other words, they're going to copulate, or they're going to perform the sex act so that they can produce a baby. In other words, this is Offred finally performing the task or the duty, fulfilling the reason for her to be in the household of the commander and the commander's wife. Now for a closer line-by-line reading and some deeper analysis of the text. In this chapter, when we finally witness the ceremony, a lot of the illusions and tension and emotion that's been building up in the previous 15 chapters come to a head. This is literally the climactic moment for the first half of the book. Finally, the epigraph makes sense to us, right? Quote, "Go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees." This is supposed to signify that we are one flesh, one being, Offred tells us. She also tells us the ceremony goes as usual. So this is sort of ordinary or perfunctory, right? This is a regular duty that they're both performing. Everyone in the room is required to be there, regardless of whether they personally want to or not. These are the jobs they're assigned by the state. This also recalls earlier the butcher shop, all flesh. All three of the participants in the ceremony are literally all flesh. And it's recalling this idea of them just being meat or bodies, part of sort of an industrial farming complex where the state produces humans. Think of a reference here to Brave New World from Aldous Huxley. This act of attempting to create life is also a reminder of death, right? So it's a memento mori of its own sorts, which recalls the chapter when they're walking by the cemetery. And living in Gilead, where fertility is really low and there's almost no birth rate, of course, there's the attendant pressure and the importance of this act. It's no longer something that's fun or laissez-faire or carefree. This is a duty they're doing for the state. It's also really the first shocking moment of kind of vulgarity or intense. So there's also this shocking moment of vulgarity when Atwood decisively chooses to use the F word, right? So she says the commander is, quote, effing the lower part of her body, right? He is effing her body. And again, keep in mind that her, right? The possessive. So Offred's admitting, yeah, this is me that he's doing this to. He's performing this act on me. And it's a vulgar act. It's not one that she enjoys. She tells us her eyes are closed. So despite the re-education, the Rachel and Leah Center, despite the politics, despite everything, this is still her, a human, and it's happening to her, right? She's being forced to lie on her back and be passive and let him act or actively do this thing to her. She also tells us this is not exactly rape. It's not lovemaking. It's not romantic. It's not passionate. It's not exciting. Offred tells us it's not recreation, not even for the commander. This is serious business, a duty for all involved. What we do know is that her eyes are closed. So she imagines looking up at the bed sheets and then being sort of ethereal, this white, floating, drifting, cloud-like substance. And then she switches tenses, or she switches pronouns. So she goes, one detaches oneself. This is an exchange of goods, of things. of objectified bodily functions. So there's no pretense of romance or passion here. And by saying one rather than I, she literally is bringing herself out of her body. She's using words to distinguish from her own experience. So this is a passive, almost absent stance, right? This is the kind of writing we usually associate with the academia or with a third person telling us a story. Whereas we've been getting narrated with the I, the we, the us through the entire book up to this point. In a sense, Offred briefly disappears before the moment of climax when the commander finishes. She literally turns herself into a one, so she sets herself at a remove. She uses language to distinguish her and her experience from the one that this is happening to. At the end of the chapter, there's a nasty little exchange between Serena Joy and Offred. So Serena says, "Get up and get out." And there's also this vulgarity being continued throughout the chapter, because this is a pun, clearly, where Atwood is playing with the idea to get it up, which is for a male to have an erection, and the idea to get out, meaning literally for him to pull out or to get out and finish the act of copulating. And so there's this continued sense that what's happening here is sort of vulgar or disgusting, right? There's this feeling that everyone in the room is kind of like, ugh, right? They're weighted down by having to do this. It's what they're bound to do. So what does bound to do mean? Bound, right? To be tied into it. They're being forced. As readers, finally, we're left wondering, who is the ceremony worse for? Offred? Serena? Her? There's this sense that nobody has enjoyed this. So the whole idea of personal enjoyment or of a kind of hedonism has been disappeared, right? Hedonism in the literal sense of like a culture that lives for pleasure or to gain experience. That's gone now. So we hear that the cloud, this dream that she's having, this cloud-like ethereal, is sprigged. And a sprig is a small stem or like a little branch, a young branch of a tree. It also used to mean in French society a branching of the family path, of the family tree. So there's this idea, I think, that they can be creating a new sprig, right? They possibly, with this act, this ceremony, are going to create a new sprig of their family tree. So gauziness is something that is thin or almost translucent. Gauze is the fine white fabric that you use to wrap an injury. So there's also the sense of the damage being done, possibly, of her being injured. Frivolity, from frivolous, means to not have purpose or meaning. So in this sense, it's valueless, right? She feels like there's a valueless transaction happening. It can also mean carefree or superficial. So there's this maybe a binary or a contrast here. Loathe means to disgust or to not want, to be repulsed by, but it also can mean reluctant or unwilling, right? So clearly everyone here is loath to participate in the ceremony. They're unwilling, they're reluctant, they don't want to. Contaminate is to pollute or to ruin something by exposing it to something poisonous or a polluting item or substance. But the word root of contaminate is also from tanger, which is French for touch. So there's this idea of touching, right? They're contaminating by touching each other, by performing this act for the ceremony. Thanks so much for watching Chapter 16. We'll be back shortly with Chapter 17 of The Handmaid's Tale. If you have any questions for me, put them in the comments below. Thanks so much. Take care.